Hi, I'm Melanie Ann Phillips, and a couple of days ago I posted a video that suggested there might be some physical attributes that could help identify one as a transsexual, or at least that are linked with transsexuality. Well, obviously that's very controversial, and I expected there to be some controversy, but I had one response that really surprised me. It said, "There's no scientific evidence to support this. Just because you believe something is true doesn't make it true." Well, on face value, that sounds pretty good, but if there's no scientific evidence to support it, then there's also no scientific evidence to refute it. And just because you don't believe something is true doesn't make it false. I'd like to talk just a little bit, in paraphrase, of what I'd said in the original article, and then discuss how this has been approached and can continue to be approached in a scientific manner. First of all, the idea is that scientifically we do have studies now that show on the brains that have been dissected of transgendered people, both those who have been on hormones for a long period of time and those who have not been on hormones. They all share certain physical characteristics with women that are not shared with men or gay men, such as the width of the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is the band of neurons, the nerves, that allow communication between the right and left sides of the brain. In women, it's much larger. In the transgendered, whether or not they used hormones, it's much larger. But in men and gay men both, straight men and gay men, men and gay men as if gay men weren't men, no, in straight men and gay men, it's much smaller. And that partially controls how the mind works and why men think differently than women. This much is known, this much you can find on Google if you do a little bit of research. What I was suggesting was that if something has actually changed the way the brain is made up, might there not be something physically that also has been changed as well? Would it not be surprising that whatever causes the brains of the transgender to be more like women would stop at the edges of that gray matter and not affect anything else in the rest of the body? I don't think so. But you have to go with the scientific method. Well, years ago someone had told me, the arms of the transgendered actually have an angle to them when the arms of males don't, and the arms of women do. And male to female transgendered folk, they have exactly the same angle. I'll show once again to demonstrate. If you put your arms like this, both men and women have their arms go straight to their sides. You don't have any problem with that. If women turn their arms to the sides, then there's an angle to the elbow that prevents you from pushing as hard as I can to get those hands in. If you turn your palms out, you can't get your arms to go flush with your sides. Now, this was true before I transitioned, it was true before I went on hormones, and it's true for a lot of the transsexual people that I encounter and have encountered over the years. For men, they turn like this, they can still put the edge of their hand right up against their leg. Their arms are straight there. There's a different angle. That is one of the reasons it has been hypothesized by people that girls throw like girls in general, is because their arm angles off to the side when they try to throw, whereas for a guy it follows straight through and gives greater leverage because it's more mechanically in that direction. And someone else suggested that I'd seen in an article, I can't pinpoint it to you right now, but you can probably find it on Google over the years, that the reason for this is that the bent elbow puts the head of a baby at the proper position to meet the nipple of the breast for nursing, and that would have happened through evolution over many, many, many years. Okay. For men, they need strength because they're the ones that are more oriented towards the outside world, not to relationships by nature of some of these brain things. They have evolved to be more focused on the outside world and physically doing and moving and throwing things, and as a result, their elbows would be at a straighter angle because there's greater strength in it and greater accuracy in it. Now, that doesn't mean that any given woman can't pitch a ball better than any given man, but it does mean in a bell curve of all men and all women, you'll find that more women are over to the side of not being as good at pitching a baseball, and more men will be over to the side of being better. It's the same thing with parallel parking. They've done studies, and they found that, by and large, more men, a greater percentage of men, are better at parallel parking than women. A smaller percentage of women are. Now, does that mean that any given woman can't be better than any given man? No, because we have our training, our experience, how much effort we put into something, and also differences in individual brains that can lead us to be one way or another. The whole idea is that this is a new concept that little bits and pieces have come out about, and I'm suggesting a hypothesis and a theory. Now, that is the scientific method. Number one, you note something, you observe something, and you say, that's interesting. I wonder what that might mean. And you come up with a hypothesis, number two in the scientific method, to say, this is what I believe it means. Then you test your hypothesis by doing experiments and by going back to more data that you gather and seeing if your hypothesis holds water. And after your hypothesis, if it hasn't been refuted by experimentation, then you say, well, what would explain things to be this way? And you develop a theory. And then you test your theory by going out and matching it against additional observation and also trying to use it to predict things that have not yet been observed. All right. That's why in my original article I said, this hypothesis from this various pieces I put together was there's something going on here that has to do with elbow angle and transgendered people. Maybe you find 95% of men or so have the straight arms and 5% or less have an angle to them. Maybe 90 or 95% of women have the angled arms and only 5% have the straight ones. But in transgendered, maybe it's 20, 30, 40% of them have the angled arms. Well, there's a lot of other things that are physical characteristics that statistically are different between men and women. Obviously, men can look like women, women can look like men, and some look an awful lot. Very pretty men, very mannish-looking women. However, there are things like the average distance of the chin compared to where the teeth are, that distance. The distance from the nose to the bottom of the upper lip. And in hard tissue, such things as the brow ridge, or how open the orbitals are, or how angular the back of the jaw is, compared to men which have a more square jaw on the average statistically. Again, any individual can vary, but as a whole society of individuals, we can see that men fall more into these categories and women into those. So, armed with this hypothesis that there is something about transgendered that makes them more like women, I went out and did my observation, and I suggested you go out and do the same thing. Go out to a coffee shop, look at men. Note, when you see their arms in that position, do they go flush when they have their palms out, or are they straight? And then look at women and do the same thing. Keep little hash marks and check them back and forth. And then finally, do it with transgendered folk that you meet at some kind of a convention or at a support group meeting. Just take notes, don't talk to anybody about it, you don't have to, and see what percentage of those transgendered people. You'll find that a much higher percentage of transgendered people have that than the general population of men, when you're talking about male to female transsexuals. Now, there are people in my own family, women, who don't have that, so I know not everyone does. But again, it's a vast majority. I repeat myself. Simply put, this is the scientific method. Number one, we see this through observation. Number two, we have a hypothesis that whatever causes the changes in the brain that we know about also extends to the body. We test the hypothesis through the observations that I've suggested you go through. And finally, after that, we come up with a theory, and the theory describes what is it that's changing brains and bodies. And one of the most interesting current theories is that there's a wash of hormones that happens in the 12th to 14th week of pregnancy. You either get a wash of testosterone over the brain and body, or you don't. And if you get it, you end up more male, and if you don't, you end up more female, both in your physicality and also in your brain and mental functioning. In addition, there is information I've just been told today that there is a suspicion that a gene out there may actually have some connections to transgenderism in some ways, that a larger percentage of transgender people have this particular genetic abnormality as opposed to normal men in the normal population. Not to say that being transgendered isn't normal, because they'll get email and complaints about that as well. So can we sum this up here? Okay. Go out in the world and test it. Look for the elbow thing. Make some comments here about what you find. But don't just say, there's no scientific evidence, because we're going out to find it. Just because science doesn't know something yet doesn't mean it isn't true. It just means there's no evidence for or against. So go out, find the evidence, and I'll be back with a number of other controversial ideas that we can put forward for you to go out and test, so maybe there can be some science and we can say something definitive about our transgendered population.